Hello, and welcome to a special edition of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And today we have a special guest.
Oh, it's me, Rosie Knight.
Yes, Rosie Knight from X-Ray Vision and, longtime content creator online, now published comic writer. I see them actually on just above Alex's shoulder.
Which is great for an audio podcast. They can't see that.
Yeah, no, it's
well,
great.
I appreciate it.
Yes,
I
appreciate it.
Also have that signed Godzilla book, the one in the middle there. Which
I
think I bought from your local shop in LA. I had them ship it to me.
Secret headquarters.
Yes, secret headquarters. Yeah. So I got like a bookmark from them, and then I think in order to get like shipping or something like that, I had to pick something else. So I bought some other that just totally on a whim, local artist comic there, and I was like, that is a cool shop. It's definitely next time.
Yeah, they're really, really special shop.
That's one I'll have to get out to next time I'm out on the West Coast. Try to make it out that way. So, but yeah, so we have Rosie here this week because the day this drops, I don't know if you're listening to this day, but the day this comes out is on Halloween, and so as Mike and I have just finished our discussion talking about Tim Seeley and Mike Norton's revival, we kind of are in middle and maybe-ish of spooky-ish season, however you want to define what that is. But we thought it'd be fun before we jump into our next deep dive book to just do a fun little comic Rex episode. And being that this drops on Halloween and when we're in the middle of so-called spooky season, we thought we'd talk about horror books, which is a little weird, as Mike and I have mentioned before, that neither one of us is like we would consider ourselves horror fans, right, Mike? Like, it's not a genre that either of us go out and read. But in preparing for this, going back and looking through my comic list, I realized that I've probably read a lot more horror than I realized. And that's mainly because I think for me and for Mike it comes down to who the creators are. I wouldn't read a book like this. It wouldn't be one that I would pick up off the shelf, but I know that writer, I know that artist, or I know that combo, I know the team, so I'll pick it up that way, because even if it's a genre that maybe I don't totally like, I trust the people who make it. And by doing that, I end up having read a lot of horror books, more than I would have thought before kind of actually examining my collection. So Rosie, how about you with horror? Where do you stand on the genre in general?
Oh, I am a big horror fan. We are actually doing a lot of horror content this month on X-Ray Vision, which I'm really stoked about. Me and Jason just recorded a really fun episode today about the best decade for horror and kind of talking about the 80s and different eras within that and different years. So that was really fun. I have like a bunch. I've got a Scream tattoo. I've got a Jurassic Park tattoo. I think that counts in the horror space. I have a Swamp Thing tattoo. I love the genre. It was one of the first things I really loved as a kid. I was a very morbid kid. But I think you guys make a great point about the nature of horror in comics is that if you like an author, James Tynion, who wrote Batman, he's also got a lot of horror books. So you're like, oh, well, I trust this writer, so I'm going to chase after him. Some of the books we're going to talk about today are by James. Also, like Ed Brubaker, Sean Phillips, their work kind of veers into that space sometimes. I just think it's a very distinct genre within comics and has been a really important part of comics history, whether it was like in the late 1800s and you're talking about like, pulps and penny dreadfuls and stuff like that, or if you're talking about in the 40s and 50s pre-code when you had the EC comics,
EC books, yeah, I was thinking the same thing,
and DC even with like House of Mystery and The Witching Hour and stuff. So I think it's always been there, and I definitely think that within comics it holds a much more accessible space because there's a lot more control when you read a comic book. If you see a page you don't like, you can turn it over. There's also no sound. And I think sound design is what makes horror really scary when you watch it as a viewer when you're watching a film. So I think it's a good place that people can try out horror, even if they're not huge kind of horror fans. As I've got older, I'm definitely a lot less into like gore and that kind of the side of horror that I used to watch a lot of, like French New Extremism and all this like really out there stuff. So it's nice to have comics as a space where I can kind of still touch on the genre and explore it in a way that's also like more experimental, because the nature of comics, if you have, is to do with what the artist can draw. Obviously there are limitations, but generally you can bring something to life, like one of the books that we're going to talk about, like The Nice House on the Lake. You can bring stuff to life in that book that would probably take you like years and millions of dollars to bring to life on screen.
Yeah.
So I think that makes comics a really interesting place for horror storytelling too.
Definitely. There's something about horror as a genre. I think whenever you think about, again, because I don't consume horror generally as a genre, but you think about in other mediums, like Stephen King, just, if you're a horror author and you're good at it, you can just put those books out forever. People will come back to that. Horror movies, whether they're, direct to streaming now on a service like Shudder, or the stuff that maybe like if A24 or Neon, one of those, kind of boutique studios, puts their stamp on something, like, it's not going to make $100 million, but it's going to be kind of relative to what the budget is. It's going to be successful versus what we spend on a superhero movie or a big blockbuster that can, that really has to reach a certain level for it to be successful. Horror doesn't have that. And you get a lot of, think about how many, at the time, quote, young filmmakers get their start doing some sort of indie horror movie or whatnot, tell a story they want to, and then that allows them to level up. I think we see the same thing in comics, and it's just one of those genres that's super reliable. And I think what you mentioned about the art, I think is important, that different things draw people to horror in different mediums, but overall it is kind of the same way. Because you're right, when you're watching a movie or a TV show, you can mess with the sound. You can mess with the jump cuts and the scares and how it's edited, how it's cut. You as the viewer just have to sit and take that, you have no control over that. But with the comic, you're right. As you're flipping through it, you can't really put a big jump scare. Maybe
you can,
on like a big,
you can have a page turn, but you can't make someone physically react in the same way that
you can't control someone just flipping through it and maybe glancing at the art before they're reading anything. And so what impact does that big double splash page have? And so, you have to get a little more creative in terms of what you do. And it could be, maybe you go super gory, you go super graphic, and that's your thing. Or you play with the colors or the sound effects or whatever it is static on the page. There's a lot of creativity that comes involved, because I think you have to think outside the box. Otherwise you lose the effect of what makes horror.
Yeah. Also, I mean, we are living in, we're recording this in the wake of Terrifier 3, the Damien Leone movie. I have to be honest, not movies. I am not really a big gore hound anymore, so not for me. But that movie just knocked Joker off the top spot. It was made for under $5 million. It opened with 18 million. Joker has collapsed 81% and barely made 10 million or something. So it is really horror is it's almost like Teflon at the box office. Even if Terrifier actually got great reviews, I think people are interested in it. But something you can get a movie that gets bad reviews that will still do super well. The Joker got a D cinema score, right? And that was seen as a death knell. But horror movies often get D cinema scores and still make a ton of money.
Yeah, because
it's an interesting genre.
What was the Ethan Hawke movie from a couple of years, the Black Phone
Black Phone,
something like that, where you get 1 star or something attached to it, and it can blow up to be huge, and you're right, there is a Teflon nonstick nature to it, where, like I said, the ceiling may not be super high. Maybe I think the Black Phone did really, really well, but the ceiling at the box office for a horror flick is probably pretty low, but the floor is pretty high. It's not gonna, you're not gonna typically not gonna get one that super bombs, because if you make it for $5, $6, $10 million and it makes 30 or 40 or 50, that's your ROI right there.
I think a lot about, I visited just before COVID, I visited the set of The Invisible Man by Lee Wannell, who's one of the guys who created Saw, and that movie's amazing. I shot it in Australia, it cost $5 million. and it opened to $100 million.
Yeah.
And it's a completely new version of the story. It doesn't really have it's IP in the fact that people know what the name is, but it's a completely different thing. And I just think about that a lot because I'm like, Hollywood could be learning a lot of lessons from that.
The big blockbusters. I mean, the stuff that, I mean, obviously the three of us also very much love the big
Oh,
superhero stuff.
I do, but I'm like, I would also love to see like a $5 million superhero movie. Like, what does that look like now? Like, what if you bring in Karen Kusama or some director who's used to working with smaller budgets and make something super weird? Like, I want to see that as much as I want to see
They do that, but then they also give them $150 million to work with
exactly.
too, you know? Like Chloe Zhao or something like that. Because we are talking to the #1 Eternals fan.
I am the
right?
#1 Eternals
fan. And like,
I'm also Birds of Prey fan, which was more like in the 70 million budget range, but again, did not necessarily deliver the money they wanted. But it was, again, Kathy Yan, fantastic director, really unique take on the genre, but not with that horror Teflon nature, you know, like those movies both had great, like Eternals did not have great reviews. I gave it one, obviously, but Kathy Yan's Birds of Prey did have fantastic reviews, but it hit in that just as COVID was kind of emerging and didn't get the chance. So it's definitely interesting to see that stuff. But yeah, that's my big dream, is like that we would get lower budget superhero movies again and get to see like, what does that look like now?
I think that's TV shows now, right? I mean,
even then though, you know, those sometimes those budgets are crazy.
How much Secret Invasion cost?
That
was give someone Jon Favreau's original budget. Say like, here's a here's a C-list character. Here's your budget, and I remember, oh my goodness, what is Bridges said like, basically making us sing. It's like,
well, I mean, think about like, I thought that the Werewolf by Night was really great. I think that's really a good thing to follow. I think Agatha All Along, they're saying, is like by far the cheapest show that they've made since they launched this, and that's great. It's really got a great aesthetic. It's very fun. Really good.
And so they did so much practical. I mean, I think to assume why maybe where all the cost goes is you think that all these shows need to have a ton of CG, and obviously you use CG in a lot of hidden ways, not just for effects. But I saw some featurettes with about Agatha that they were doing, you know, maybe except for like the broom flying, if you just saw, you know, spoilers, I guess. But outside of that, like all of the other things in terms of like costume
lots
changes,
of great practical makeup.
Everything they're doing is all practical. So you know, there's something to be said for having some of those limits and thus kind of forcing creativity.
Exactly.
Forcing an adeptness with storytelling. So I think we do see that. And I think, you know, to pivot back into comics here.
It's the same thing.
One thing you said, I think, in terms of accessibility, specifically for comics, is that generally horror is outside the superhero genre, right? Obviously, there's always horror within the superhero genre, but so many people, kind of lay people, when they hear comics, they think of like superheroes. They only think of Marvel and DC, right? They only think of, they don't even think of any sort of, even like independent stuff. They'll think of it's capes and it's cowl, it's heroes and all that stuff. And you can hand someone, like you mentioned Nice House already, like there's something weird going on, but they're no superheroes, you know, that convention doesn't exist. And I think there are people who can then be shocked and who could then be comic fans of horror, because maybe they just don't like superhero stuff, which is fine, you know, taste or taste, but you can get horror readers that aren't necessarily overall comic readers, you know?
It's true. And I mean, also like something that I've learned from I've got a niece and a nephew in London. I've got lots of nieces and nephews all over the world, and they're all wonderful. But my niece and nephew in London, who are like 10 and 5, they love creepy stuff. Like that is really their main. Five Nights at Freddy's, Poppy's Playhouse, like all this really creepy stuff. But the way that they've gotten into comics is because they love Venom, because Venom is horror-ish. They love Deceased. They love Marvel Zombies. So I think it's this really interesting two-way street where comics can use, like superhero publishers can use horror to widen their audience, but also like people who don't like superheroes can use horror as a way to get into comics too. So it's kind of that nice two-way two-way street.
Sure, definitely. So yeah, so kind of the exercise that we talked about here, Mike, was we wanted to talk about maybe each pick three horror books from whatever publishers, whatever creators, and give a little rundown of kind of why we like this book, what drew us to the story, and kind of kick off conversation from there. I'm sure we'll talk about way more than 9
I'm
books.
sure.
Yeah, we'll go way more than that. But I guess Rosie, why don't we start with you? You're our guest, and you already mentioned, I think, one of your first books, your first selection. So why don't we start with that one?
Okay, so Nice House on the Lake by James Tynion and Alvaro Martinez Bueno. The letters are by Amworld Design and colors by like multiple time Eisner winner Jordi Belair. Lots of Eisner winners on this book.
Yes.
It is the thing I love about this book, and the reason that I have it's been very at the forefront of my mind, is I really love the "and then there were none" kind of trope of people are invited to a house and then it's a locked room mystery, and it's essentially the setup for every slasher film. It's one of the best tropes ever, and Agatha Christie really kind of trailblazed that. But what I love about this book is when James Tynion and Alvaro Martinez Bueno put this book together, they give you a setup that you recognize in that Walter, who is kind of this old friend of these 10 different people, invites them to this beautiful house on the lake. It's like an architecture porn book. Like Bueno just kills every single page that he's drawing a house. I want to do a million books that are just about houses after reading this book. But like it completely upends every expectation you have of what happens in a book like this. And it is a sci-fi book, and it's a cosmic horror book, and it's a book about friendship, and it's a book about the apocalypse, and it's a book about being in love. And I just thought it was such a fantastic book. And recently, the second cycle of the story began, which is called The Nice House by the Sea. And I was really excited because, one, I'm English, so I love the sea. I don't call it the ocean. And I was very excited to see this kind of new Mediterranean setting. We were lucky enough to have James come on the podcast and talk about the book when we relaunched iHeart recently. And what I loved was that, once again, all my expectations were just totally turned on their head by that second cycle. So this is just a book that inspires me when I'm trying to write something. I'm writing a horror comic at the moment, and I'm pitching a couple of other ones. And it's one of these books where I'm always going back to this. I'm like, if I can think of a setup that I like, because I love very specific tropes, how can I then just turn it on its head and kind of explode it out of the box of expectations that people have? And I think James Tynion is so good at that. And I also just think this is like an exceptionally cool book. I think this is one of those books where people are going to be recommending it for a long time as, a graphic novel, which I think is something DC has always excelled at. Oh, Watchmen, Sandman, even the original Hellblazer stuff, Swamp Thing, which I'm going to talk about later. Those are all great, like, what do you give to somebody who loves horror kind of collections? And I feel like that lives in this space too.
Yeah, I mean, we probably could have done an entire episode just talking about books written by James Tynion IV.
Yeah, we could have each had our top 3.
And not gone through there. I think maybe when he was talking with you and Jason, he talked about how DC basically asked, like, can you do something that's killing the children for us?
I know, how crazy is that? Like
that idea. But I think what you said about it being an evergreen title, because it is technically a DC book.
And it is, interestingly, it is a DC creator-owned book, which they haven't. That's how you know how much they love James Tynion, because they haven't really done that stuff since like The Invisibles with Grant Morrison, or Preacher at Vertigo.
It's pretty much since Vertigo, since they folded Vertigo, you really have that. But this is a book that has DC on it, but it has no connection to any wider DC universe. It said he's creating, much like he's done in a lot of other books, like Something Is Killing the Children. He's created his own universe of characters and ideas and all that. And it can. I think, was it 12 issues? Is the first.
So it's
going to be 12 and 12, right?
And it's 2 volumes of 6 each. So 12, just like Watchmen, 12 issues. It's the perfect best-selling kind of, you can get it into the bestseller graphic
Hmm.
novels. To a
Hmm.
lot of people, it will probably only exist that way,
Hmm.
and they'll
Yeah.
probably never know that it was single issues. It's also all available on DC Universe Infinite, which I do think is the superior comics website. I love it. They have so
Versus
much great.
Marvel
You
Unlimited.
know what? I love Marvel Unlimited
Yeah.
too, but DC Universe Infinite has like an extensive amount of really, really old, weird comics and like lots of like Golden Age and Silver Age stuff. It also currently has pretty much like instant releases, so you don't have to wait a really long time to get the new comics. But yeah, it's I read this on there recently in preparation for this, and I was just like still so blown away. I do really love reading a physical comic because
Yeah.
that's just how I am. My house is full of physical media, but this comic specifically, I think is so beautiful when you read it on like an iPad or even on your phone. Like the definition of Bueno's art and the way that the architecture looks and the way you can kind of zoom in on the mysterious kind of codes and things that there are to unlock in this book. It feels very interactive when you read it digitally, and I really just, yeah, it's such a good book.
Yeah. It's very, very good. Um, I, Tynan is one of the reasons that I realize I've read more horror than
Hmm.
than
Hmm.
when I go through and realize that pretty much all of his creator-owned stuff, including a book that
Hmm.
well, books, I guess, quote unquote, series of books that Mike and I have talked about. We talked about the Apocalyptic trilogy that he did early
Hmm.
on at Boom with Eric Donovan.
Yeah.
What is it? Mimetic, Cognetic, Eugenic. Is that right,
Hmm.
Mike?
That yes, in order. Well done.
Yes, in order. And there, yeah. So, there were kind of three spiritually linked books about ways the world can end. Which is,
Hmm.
he started those books before he was working at DC regularly, before he did Detective and then Batman and everything he's done there and blown up. So it's kind of like early Tynan. But
Hmm.
you see that sense of all the horror book. And I'm running through, and this isn't even all the horror books. Books that are currently going on right now, written by James Tynan, that have a horror bent to them. Something is
Yeah.
killing the children. The Department of Truth, The Deviant, World Tree, Spectrograph. That doesn't include a little miniseries like The Closet, an older series like The Woods. I mean,
Hmm.
or Blue Book, which is in like Alien. Everything he does has this hint of horror to it. And even, I
He's
guess,
definitely a genre. He's definitely
yeah,
like a genre lover.
yeah, yeah. And even his DC work, the stuff he did when he was writing Detective, during the Rebirth era, and a little bit with when he was writing Batman, the main title. He introduced a bunch of new characters that really kind of had like a body horror element to them.
Hmm.
You remember that? Because it was like they kind of augmented themselves with various tech and things of that nature.
Yeah.
So even in his superhero stuff, he's done so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Everything's got a horror bent
probably
to it.
it's probably not a coincidence that his mentor and the guy who like got him into comics was Scott Snyder, who's
Yes, he was.
also someone who's kind
Yeah.
of always
Hmm.
straddled that line
Definitely.
and who has always kind of been interested in bringing horror into comics. I'll also say that I used to work at a comic book shop in London called Orbital, RIP, is now dead, but it was a truly magical place. And I will say something that I think adds to the nature of like the popularity of horror comics is they are like that evergreen book. Like there are people who will come in and they just all they want to see is like, where's the horror comics? Like, do you have a horror comic? I don't really read comics, but I love horror. I think a lot about a Cullen Bunn book called Harrow County, which was
Hmm.
really
Yeah.
good. And that was like a perennial great seller for us. And it was just random people like coming off the street because we were in right next to Leicester Square. So like really in the center of London. And that would always be like a perennial. People would just come in and be like, "Oh, what's this about?" Or
Yeah.
witches.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's definitely really interesting. And I think that pickup ability of a horror book feels less overwhelming than like, oh, if I pick up this Marvel book, will I need to know 25 things that happened before it? Which obviously me and Jason are always talking about this, and I know you guys totally get it. Like, actually, when you're a kid and you get into this stuff, the joy of it is just like randomly picking up a book off the shelf. So I
Yeah.
do think that you can enjoy it without knowing that, but I do think people are more aware of the overwhelming nature of it. So it's like I think horror and these kind of more standalone or 6-issue or 12-issue collections make people feel like, oh, I could read this.
They come off very well in collected edition. They come off very easily in collected edition. So yeah, you can always sell someone, oh yeah, nice house by the lake here. You can just, hand that to them right there. Here's a complete story. Oh, you like that? Here's the sequel.
Yeah, exactly.
And they don't have to know anything else about anything other than they liked that. So no, I think that's a great pick. Is it my favorite ongoing Tynan? You know what? I really love Something Is Killing the Children. I love that world. It's been going on longer too, but I really do love the Nice House series. So,
yeah.
Yep. All right. Mike, how about you go with your first one?
Okay. Well, so I think I'm the most horror novice on the podcast right now, and I remind people, or in case you haven't heard me say this in a while, I also came to comics as an adult in my 30s, so don't have the deep back catalog. But the first time I really fell in love with a creator was Jeff Lemire, and it was Jeff Lemire's art that it drew me in. So my first pick is going to be from Jeff Lemire, and I just want to ride the coattails. We just came off of Revival, and what sold me on Revival the first time I picked it up in trade was the forward in the first volume from Jeff Lemire. I'm just going to read a couple sentences, but this I think is just a wonderful encapsulation of what horror. Jeff says, "Now I understand that my attitude towards death may seem a bit cold and callous, but that's not actually the case. The memories that I was recounting above were from dozens of funerals I had to attend for people I barely knew, but there were others too. Too many others. I watched 3 of my grandparents die as a kid. My dad's sister drowned in our swimming pool when I was 5 as I stood on the deck watching him try to resuscitate her. And my cousin, only 2 years younger than me, was killed in a terrible car accident about 10 years ago. Those were the deaths that mattered. Those were the deaths that leave a mark on a kid and stay with him." And when I read that, that's the end of the. I was, I get chills reading even his prose in the beginning of someone else's book, but I think it speaks to the cathartic nature.
Yeah, definitely.
There's clearly this, boy who watched his aunt die by the side of the pool is still grieving and still working that out. And typically when I would talk about that kind of him working out his grief, I'd be talking about, Frog Catchers or May's book or, one of these other ones. But I liked him kind of swinging for the fences on Gideon Falls. I think anyone who went to a comic shop when that was coming out would think that's just a straight horror play. I mean, the covers were gorgeous, but my gosh, they were creepy. Like the big smiling faces and the silhouettes and the city grid and the guy with the mask, which, by the way, your main character, Norton's always wearing a mask. He's afraid of breathing the air in public, which this series wrapped right around COVID.
It first came out 2017.
Yeah,
so somewhere in that zone.
Maybe like the final trade was coming out.
Yeah, I mean, it was still winning Eisner Awards in 2020, so it was like peak time. Okay. It was definitely prescient.
Yeah. Well, there was a fundraiser that Jeff hosted very early in the pandemic to money for something where he was signing books and then you could get them slabbed. So I mailed my Gideon Falls #1 and I had the Jeff Lemire variant, which Norton with the mask, and Jeff signed it and wrote 100% on the mask. And I was like, all right, that's a keepsake. So that's still on the wall behind me.
I love that.
But getting into the book itself, what I like about it is I'm always someone who comes into horror kind of, as Alex said, through the side door, through the back door. Like sometimes when I'm reading the description and it says that it's horror, I'm like, that actually takes a point off for me. It has to be something like horror and mind-bending sci-fi. And by the way, I should shout out the other creators. Andrea Sorrentino is the artist.
Oh, unbelievable.
So good.
There's nothing quite like Sorrentino's art. And they first connected on, I think, New 52 Green Arrow, and then Old Man Logan at Marvel, create their own thing together. Now they have their own universe. And then it's Jeff Lemire, so high probability it's a Dave Stewart coloring job.
Yeah.
And it's a virtual certainty that it's Steve Wands doing the
Steve
lettering.
Wands, yeah.
And both of those are the case for this book. But it's got multiversal stuff. It's got Twin Peaks stuff. It's got like conspiracy theorists. It's got, big city paranoia. It's got small town creepiness, because kind of your two main characters are Norton, this guy who doesn't have a lot of friends and spends his time going through garbage, reconstructing Black Barn. And then you go to the seemingly unrelated small town with a washed up Catholic, and you're following that character. And then you just start to watch as these paths, the paths cross, they converge, they get intertwined. And you think you're reading horror issue to issue, but as you finish each trade, the intrigue just keeps ratcheting up. And I think, it was really the first horror comic that I read, like series beginning to end. So it holds a special place in my heart for that. I really loved every bit of it, including the ending. And I think there have been some people didn't like the ending because it maybe felt like a little bit too much of a horror trope or something like that. And I was like, that's great. I'm immune to horror tropes because it's not my genre. So now everything else is,
I think that you make a good point about like coming in through the side door, because I do think this is definitely like a conspiracy thriller, but with like a horror, tinge. It's very Twin Peaks. It definitely is that unsettling kind of horror. So I think that Lemire's really good at doing horror adjacent that kind of sneaks in a lot of really scary stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing, Rosie, Mike and I, our show, we like to mainly focus on indie creator-owned stuff. And I think one thing that we both really love is when we see a creative team that maybe gets put together on a book at Marvel or DC, who then maybe they have a long run on that, who then years later have a creator-owned book there, which tells me that, they liked working on that, whatever it was. And Mike said it was Green Arrow first, right? It was Green Arrow first, and then Old Man Logan at Marvel. And then years later, it's like, hey, we have a creator-owned series out, which means that something in their collective creator minds clicked. And they say, you know what, we're doing this for hire stuff. But we have all these other ideas. What's something else we can do that we own? And anytime I see that transition of like, oh, these people worked on a book for DC or Marvel, even if I maybe didn't read that or not as familiar with it, I'm always a little more inclined to check out something, because that says that while they're working on this other book, they were having other conversations about other things.
They were having fun.
Yeah, like what's something else? Where do our other interests align? It's like, hey, we're working on Green Arrow, and because that's what the job is, the contract we signed. But what other things do you like? What kind of stories do you like? What kind of worlds do you like? And then that can evolve into their own book. And so I love to see that transition whenever thus you can follow a creative team from book to book to book, and that you're going to get a certain level of quality there.
Definitely.
Which I guess leads to my first book. Mike mentioned Jeff Lemire is his favorite creator. My current favorite creative team in all of comics is Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips, which Rosie, you already mentioned.
I love them. Yeah,
they are
legendary.
They're the automatic sub for me when they put a book out. Whether it's they've transitioned to standalone original graphic novels now. I would love if they went back to monthly comics, but I know you never know. They found their lane, and it doesn't matter. As soon as it comes out, I'm ordering it from my shop, and I'm going to get it. But the book I've chosen is Fatale.
I love this book.
Brubaker and Phillips. It started with Dave Stewart on color. And then about halfway through it switched over to Betty Brightweiser, who was then their colors for kind
a
of
long
the middle
time.
chunk. Yeah, a long time before now. Sean's son Philip does their colors.
Yeah, Jacob Phillips is so great, and he has his own comics now as well. Which
he has his own stuff.
I
and
always sub to.
It's got to be pretty good. He's drawn his own books with
he's really
Phil
Condon,
fantastic. Chip Zdarsky, and then he's coloring his dad's stuff too. But it's really great. This book, so everything Brubaker Phillips do has some sort of something. It's something dash noir. Everything has a noir bent. There's always some crime element. Maybe there's a supernatural element, maybe there's a horror element, maybe there's a superhero element, but there's always something noir. And this is kind of one of their first kind of horror noir books. You have its story focuses around a character, this woman named Josephine, out on the West Coast there. It follows, I think, from like 1940s or 50s San Francisco-ish area through like 1970s Hollywood, which is, if you know Sean Phillips' art, that kind of slightly retro era is just so good. The way he draws characters, the way he draws clothes, and kind of the vibe, it works perfectly. But it takes that crime noir sleazy underworld kind of thing, and like pours on some Lovecraftian kind of horror with it. And it's a really cool style for them to dive into. Because said with this Brubaker and Phillips, and at this point, this was a book. This was early in their 2012, 2013,
Yeah.
or it was early in their Image deal. You know, I had read Sleeper Incognito, I had read Criminal, and I think I had already started reading Kill or Be Killed before I went back and read Fatale later, because it was a horror book and it wasn't kind of in the crime genre. So for me to go back and read that was simply because it was just these two, and I've read everything else they've ever done. So I was like, well, I can't leave this out of it. And yeah, it's such a cool world, and it fits their style.
Yeah, I love this book. I read this book when I worked at the comic shop because it was all collected at that point. And this was like a slow day book that I would continue to read. And this is actually like, I think this is still my favorite book by them. I just think for me, it combines the noir storytelling and the gorgeous, like timely kind of retro artwork with this very cool reimagining of kind of Lovecraftian stuff, but also set in this kind of old Hollywood world, and then looking at how like from the 30s to the 90s something like this would happen. Also, I love a cult story. I've always liked, I'm not a big fan, I don't really watch true crime or anything, but like I love a fictional book about something like that. I love like a horror movie about a cult. I think it's an interesting human psychological space, and this is like a really, really interesting
and
exploration
this just
of
came
that.
back. I hadn't reread this in forever, but a new compendium just came out recently, and I picked that up digitally because
Oh, nice.
because digitally is how I end up rereading things. Like it's something I'm going to read in floppies if I have, and I have all the issues in floppies. Then I'll probably have the trades in physical trade because it looks good on a bookshelf. But if I'm going to reread something, I've gotten to the point now where I'm not pulling single issues out. I'm not pulling trades at the bookshelf. If I want to reread something and I really love it, and it's Brubaker and Phillips, so I know I'm going to love it, I buy it digitally so I can just, queue it up whenever it is, have my tablet with me wherever I can
And
fire it
just
up and go through it. Yeah. And so this just came out, and I was reminded of it because the most recent Brubaker Phillips original graphic novel was a book called Houses of the Unholy, which is they just went back into the horror genre, and that was about cults, satanic panic, kind of kidnapping, murder, conspiracy. It's kind of some of the things they touched on in Fatale, kind of given a little more modern spin for Houses of the Unholy. So for them to go back after all these years to go back into the horror section, kind of part of their oeuvre, it was cool to see. And so Fatale coming back out, getting to reread that again for the first time, and maybe since I don't know if I really reread it since it came out. I know Criminal is my personal favorite, Brubaker Phillips, and I reread that like multiple times a year. Just go back and read all of Criminal again because I love it so much. But Fatale, it really is a cool book, and to see Sean Phillips's art in that, because when you're reading Criminal or Reckless or any of these books that are set in the real world, he's drawing real people, and his style works for that. But when he gets to go into the supernatural, he gets to draw some monsters and really weird stuff like that, and to kind of watch him get the flex out of the standard, like guys beating each other up and shooting up clubs and banks and stuff like that. When he gets to do more, it's really cool to watch and to see. And so, I think Fatale will be, now that I have the compendium digitally, it's maybe a book I'm going to go back to a little more often now, because it wasn't as readily available for me like some of the other books were. So now that there's a new edition out, it'll probably be a little more in the rotation for me.
I love that.
Yeah, it's
that
a great
one's
one.
I think as well, that's another great side door into horror, because it really reads more like a noir, but it just has this tinge of kind of cosmic sci-fi horror in there, as well as what we come to expect from kind of like a Brubaker and Phillips book.
So, Mike and I, we talked about Kill or Be Killed, which is one of my more favorite recent ones. If you just like the kind of style and the vibe that Brubaker and Phillips has, but you're not a big horror person, definitely pick this up, because as we talked about, if there's a creator that you like and you
Yeah.
like some of their books or what you've read of them, even if it's a
Hmm.
genre you maybe not be into, even it's
Yeah.
like some of their earlier stuff like Sleeper, Incognito, which have like a
Hmm.
superhero bent to them. Like I think Sleeper is technically in the Wildstorm universe. So like
Oh
that's
yeah, yeah. I mean,
yeah, so
that's crazy.
that's a like for hire licensed book, but
Hmm.
they put their spin on it. They put their noir spin and storytelling spin on it, and you're going to find a way in. So, and I think Fatale is definitely that. And again, it's a book I only would have read. I only read because I've already read everything else by Brubaker and Phillips. Outside of that, you read me the premise and I see Lovecraftian, and probably not for me.
I'm not a Lovecraft lover either, so
Yeah,
I definitely had to get over that myself, but it's
exactly.
actually
Yeah,
very enjoyable.
I throw my trust in the Brubaker Phillips brand, and for me personally, has never let me down. No matter
Yeah.
what book it is, I'm in for that. So
So
yeah,
to
Fatale by Brubaker
summarize,
Phillips. Yeah,
Alex's recommendation is everything by Brubaker Phillips, and mine was
Exactly.
everything Lemire's ever touched.
yeah.
Exactly.
And Rosie's
Exactly.
Rosie's was everything James
Everything James
Tynan
Tynan
has
Yeah.
did,
never done.
really.
So
Yeah.
after the
So
first round, the subtotal's about $6,000.
Yeah.
General
yeah.
issues and
Oh,
trades.
guys, yeah, you're
Yeah.
gonna be in trouble.
Yeah. So all right. So Rosie, back to you. What's number 2 for you?
Okay, I'm gonna go for another. This is another classic.
Mhm.
This is the Alan Moore, Steve Bissett Swamp Thing run, Saga of the
Yeah.
Swamp Thing, which began it with Saga of the Swamp Thing Volume 2, Issue 21, which is kind of like your real launch pad, though I do believe, let me check, I have the first Alan Moore issue here. I do believe it, yeah, he came on in issue 20, but the 21 is where you really start it. You can get a great compendium of this from your local library. DC has republished it many times. You just need volume Saga of Swamp Thing Volume 2 or the Alan Moore Steve Bissett Swamp Thing Volume 1. It's very confusing the way they number comics. But this is basically like, I'll never forget reading this issue for the first time where they basically killed Swamp Thing, right? Just before Alan Moore came on. And then he came on and they said, hey, you can kind of do whatever you want. And he went, oh, okay, well, I'll do Jason Woodrow, the Floronic Man. He's going to do an autopsy on the Swamp Thing. And he's essentially going to reveal, well, the Swamp Thing's not dead because he is just plants. He was never actually Alec Holland. He was never really humanoid. He just took on Alec Holland's memories and feelings after he was killed in the swamp where Swamp Thing lived. And I remember just thinking, like, oh my God, like this is one of the smartest, most interesting, like weird things I've ever read. And it absolutely kind of changed everything. Because I remember very deeply the Swamp Thing animated series, which is hilarious because there's only 5 episodes of it, which I own all of on VHS now. But like the Swamp Thing theme tune where it was like Swamp Thing, dun, dun, and it was to the,
The Wild
the
Thing.
sound of Wild Thing, right? And like I loved Swamp Thing, and I remember reading this and just thinking it was so crazy. And then years later, I would like kind of reread the whole saga. And it's not, I'd say if you are unsure, if you're not a horror lover, this is definitely more horror adjacent.
Yeah.
It's not really, really scary. It's much more in that old EC House of Mystery vein where it's like strange things are occurring. There are odd monsters. This is kind of more of a mad scientist story than like a straight horror story. And it also has like a really incredible romance. There's a very famous issue called Rites of Spring where Swamp Thing and Abby Arcane kind of she eats a tuber off his body and they commune and kind of like she learns about the environment and about Swamp Thing. And I think it's just one of the best issues of comics ever made. So this is like a great introduction to Swamp Thing. If you want something more classically horror, you can just read the original Len Wein, Bernie Wrightson first appearance of Swamp Thing is like pure classic horror. Those two are so great. Obviously, like unbelievable, legendary creative team there. But I love Swamp Thing. I have a Swamp Thing behind me right
I was gonna
now.
say, yeah,
He's there with some Swamp Thing Swamp Thing movie adaptation comics. I love a weird adaptation comic. But yeah, I think this book is so great. I think it's probably, I wouldn't say it's objectively the best thing that Alan Moore has written because he's written so many like legendary kind of things, but it does, for me, it's my favorite. It's my most revisited, and I think it avoids a lot of the pitfalls of some of his more iconic works like V for Vendetta and Watchmen, which, you know, are so revolutionary and important, but also very like misogynistic. Whereas
Yeah.
I feel like this work is very, it loves Abby. He loves Abby Arcane. This is like a celebration of who she is. It's a celebration of Swamp Thing. It's a celebration of weird outsiders finding each other. And Steve Bissett's art is just unreal. Like some of the most romantic, cool, strange kind of thing. This is a perfect like spooky season read. Like you don't want full horror. You just want something that's going to make you feel a little Halloweenish. That's
It's
probably going to
eerie.
make you. It's
Yeah,
very
it's very
eerie.
eerie. Yeah.
It's very beautiful, and it's probably going to make you want to get like a tattoo of Steve Bissett's art. Also, as well, it introduces this idea of the green as this like magical force in DC that's very connected to Swamp Thing and the environment, and is now like a huge part of the greater
Yeah.
DC lore. So if you're
Yeah.
listening because you love superheroes, this is a great place to kind of learn about that part. We now obviously know DC has the red as well, which is kind of this other aspect in that kind of sci-fi environmental magic in the universe. So yeah, I really love this book, and I think it's really special. And also, you know, this is the series where John Constantine was first introduced, which I love him and Swampy together. So yeah, just a really fun
Another horror
eerie
adjacent
book.
character.
Exactly.
Constantine. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I was really thinking about including Hellblazer, especially the Mike Carey stuff. I think that stuff is so great.
And Swamp.
DC, I think they excel at doing the horror adjacent. Like
Yeah.
Marvel's horror stuff is very specifically either really iconic, like again from this same era, like obviously Blade and doing, you know, Tomb of Dracula and stuff like that. But I do think that DC has consistently kept the horror part of their publishing alive.
And I think a lot of that came when Vertigo came around, and the books
Mm-hmm.
that got shifted to Vertigo were, you know, the
Yeah,
ongoing
even
books.
Doom Patrol.
Yeah,
Doom
I
Patrol
was
is
gonna,
very, very horror adjacent.
Sandman in a lot of ways has horror
Mm-hmm.
aspects that was ongoing. You know, said Swamp Thing, Hellblazer, all of that. Those are the books that got shifted because I guess they were considered like the mature stuff
Yeah.
or whatever it was. And Swamp Thing too, as a character, has been this. I don't want to say launching point, but in terms of
Oh,
creators who have
definitely
come
kind
on it,
of.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I was
definitely.
running through like names that jump out at me: Rick Veitch, Grant Morrison,
Mm-hmm.
Mark Miller, Brian K. Vaughan, Scott Snyder, Charles Soule, Rom V, like all the way.
Crazy.
Yeah, go. So we're going back from the 80s, the mid 80s, the 85, 86 for Alan Moore when he started,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe earlier,
Yeah.
somewhere in there, somewhere in the early 80s, mid 80s, I think, up until literally now. I think Rom V had just written the most recent
Oh yeah, and
stuff there.
it's again, it's really, really
Yeah,
incredible. Rom
and
killed it.
so
Oh, and also like I just want to say if you listen to podcasts, you probably already like X-Ray Vision, you probably already
yeah,
know this. But if you want something good to watch, right now you can actually watch the Tubi for free. You can watch the DC Universe Swamp Thing series, which was produced by James
James
Wan.
Wan, yeah.
And Gary Doberman, another iconic horror director, was a big part of it. And I love this show. I think it's so underrated. I've been trying to get them to bring it back. It when they actually during COVID, when they didn't have any new production, they put it on to the CW and it debuted
Yeah,
with a huge
it did
audience
really, really
numbers.
well.
It's really creepy, it's really romantic, it's really cool. It's not too scary. So I will also recommend that because
Yeah,
I mean it's hilarious to me that it's not on Max. It's like it's on Tubi, but that's a classic David Zaslav choice. So,
yeah,
but so
yeah.
yeah, so if you want something cool to watch as well as read, I definitely recommend that.
Definitely, definitely. That's a good one. Mike, yeah, back to you. What do you got? Number two.
Okay. So I think for number two, I'm gonna just debating on the order, but I think we're gonna go Ice Cream Man.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Which I didn't know, by the way, was a direct cassette horror in the 90s.
Oh yeah.
Of
I
course
was
you know
when
that.
this came
Of
out,
course you know
I
that.
was like, B movies, like, come on. Also, Mike, I must say, for somebody who got into horror, as you said, like more recently and in your adulthood, you have like exceedingly good taste. You're always picking something that's like very beloved, very like well created, very well received. I think you definitely found your niche in comics when you joined the community.
Well, but that's all about going to good shops
Mm-hmm.
and finding a good
Absolutely.
community of people. And as a tribute to my old comic shop in St. Louis, which is where I got started, we did a one-shot coverage of the book Romulus last month,
Oh
which was a
wow.
4-issue limited series from Image, which was positioned as if it was going to be continuing. And that was my first exposure to sometimes it's just gone. You just go, you're like,
R.I.P.
Yeah.
I have a pull
That's a
list.
true
Yeah.
comics feeling.
Yeah.
And like I being, well, I guess not that young, but very naive, I like wrote to, it was like, hey,
Ah.
coming back.
Oh
And
man, you are
they
truly,
Yeah.
truly
I
in
was
the comics
crushed.
world now.
And they replied. They were like, sorry, there's no plans to bring that back right now. But I had it happen with 2 books that year, and I was like, okay, I'm in the world now. That I was reading it, I was telling people about it, and then it was just gone. And I was like, it's
Hmm.
a good thing no one writes down I fall in love with things that have a short lifespan.
That's the nature of being a comic book fan.
It
I
is.
know.
Yeah.
Well,
And then
that's
you'll see
why
some.
I
Yeah.
picked some things that have like some deep bench to them. And Ice
Hmm.
Cream Man, I
Hmm.
believe, is still being
Oh
published.
my gosh, and
Yeah.
it's like so you're talking about like a comic that I think has like 9 volumes or something.
Yeah.
Like it
Yeah.
I was gonna say it's
really,
got to be in. It's got to be in
yeah, I
the
think whatever they're publishing now will be
20s
the
or
10th
yeah.
volume.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why I picked this, a great creative team, W. Maxwell Prince, which I actually considered picking a few different things from him. It's Martin, is it Morazzo? Is that how we say the
Um,
last name?
Marazzo probably with the
Morazzo.
double
Yeah,
Z
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Got it.
Whatever. Yeah.
And then colors by Chris. Wow, I should have been prepared. O Halloran. O apostrophe Hallloran. At least in the first couple trades attributed, and then lettering by good old Neon,
Hmm.
which how could you ever forget a name like good old Neon? It's like Crank. But what I love about this one is what I like to say is true about comics. I was so glad it came up earlier in this conversation. This idea that any single issue could be someone's.
Hmm.
Um, I don't often feel that's true with like ongoing superhero series and things like that. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna buy you Batman one unless I know
Hmm.
that's the beginning of a new story arc or something. It's like kids will go in completely unabashed. 103 could be
Hmm.
their own starting point, and they'll just pick it up as they go. They're fine with the discomfort of it. Adults are like Googling it and trying to like read like, well, what happened to, what else
Hmm.
do I need to know in order to get this? And Ice Cream Man, you can truly buy any, give it to any, whether they've
Hmm.
read a comic before or not, whether they know what Ice Cream Man is. It doesn't matter. They are all standalone. It's like watching a single episode of The Twilight Zone. There's a cumulative effect from watching The Twilight Zone week after week, where it's like, oh, is this going to be genuinely scary, or is this going to be more of like a, what's the one
Is
where
it like a philosophical kind of
exactly,
existential
Yeah.
horror? Is it a sci-fi? Is it
Psychological.
a
Yeah.
true horror?
and
Yeah,
sometimes
I'm a
it's dark
horror.
comedy.
Yeah, I'm a horror Twilight fan. I actually love his later show, The Night Gallery, for that reason. But I think you're so right. It's like there's you can still I watch Twilight Zone anytime it comes on TV. They do a lot of marathons on broadcast antenna TV here, and you can just really click into any episode in a way that is unlike pretty much any other TV show, especially with such a long running show.
I think the more recent comp would be something like Black Mirror, right? The
Yes.
idea, I mean,
Hmm.
that's very specific in terms of kind of technology and all that, but that same kind of
Yeah.
anthology idea that there's kind of one unifying factor or idea. But yeah, every issue is
Hmm.
standalone and the anthology is something all my favorite comics are anthologies in general,
Mm.
Yeah, pretty much they're all anthologies, all
No one
very,
was
very
fact
long
checking
going.
you. I just want
Yeah,
you to
yeah,
know.
yeah.
I like that. No, but you are fact checking yourself. That's what we
Yeah,
do
I
as
was just
comic
double
book
checking. Yeah, they're
fans.
so I love a good anthology, and so the
Hmm.
idea that you can read one, pick up anything, or start from the beginning and get the full flavor all the way through. That's a terrible
Flavor
pun for
pun
ice cream
intended.
man.
Nice. No,
Yeah, it's
I'm usually the
terrible.
one with the puns, and Alex just stares at me until I move on.
Well, because when I make them there, I make them by accident. But
I
yeah,
love a pun.
yeah,
But yeah, this
that's
I think you touch on something really interesting with with that note about Ice Cream Man, because like I think something that I find very appealing about this comic is like it is rare for a comic like that is an anthology to go on for so long, but also it's rare for a comic that's like so depressing. Like this
Yeah.
comic is like a bummer. There's like a really funny Reddit thread that I think about a lot because it always comes up if you're looking for like image covers, because the guy posted, he just happened to pick up the issue where it was the 30th anniversary Spawn cover where Spawn is on the cover. So it looks like really
Oh yeah.
silly. And he posted it on Reddit and he was like, is this book always like such a fucking bummer? And everyone's like, yeah, man.
yeah,
And it
pretty much,
fucking
pretty much.
rules. Like,
Yeah,
that's why we love it, man.
yeah.
But
And I
Yeah.
think about that a lot because it's like, it's really rare that a book like that nowadays, especially, is 9 volumes in.
Yeah, the
oh
fact
yeah.
that it's gone on so long. Yeah, yeah. Because I
Mhm.
was thinking about another when you mentioned this book, Mike, I was thinking about another anthology book that Maxwell Prince has written, but it's Haha, which
Yeah.
it's a little
Mhm.
6-issue series. Uh, it's about clowns, so your mileage may vary on if that's also counts as horror.
Mhm.
But in that one, each issue is drawn by a different artist, which again,
Mhm.
that makes sense with this idea of the anthology, right? He has another
Mhm.
book called Swan Song, similar way, where if you're taking one idea and then you have these stories, but you're working with different artists to bring obviously different visuals,
Mhm.
different feel, different vibes. I was thinking about that as you mentioned this book here, because Martin Marzaro did all the books, all the issues of Ice Cream Man so
Yeah.
far. He does one of the issues of Haha, but I went back and looked through the people he worked with on Haha, and he worked with Vanessa Del Rey, Zoe Thorogood,
Mhm.
Roger Landridge, Patrick Horvath, Gabriel Hernandez Walta, and Marzaro.
I
And
mean,
so
wow,
those names
what
are
a
incredible. But you
team.
think of like, so Walta had already done Vision at that point. So people kind of knew who he was. Patrick Horvath had not done Beneath the Trees Where Nobody Sees.
No.
And now that book is blown up. Zoe
Mhm.
Thorogood had not done It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth.
Of course.
I think she had done Billy Scott, but so she was someone, she hadn't done the cover, she hadn't done Rain yet. So like
Mhm.
getting these people, some of these artists before they then kind of blow up, working with them because he just knows they're talented and knows they can bring the vibe and the feel that he's
Mhm.
it's there's a talent in that. And I think the anthology nature of that kind of the structure works.
Yeah.
And I think you were mentioning, Mike, that as Ice Cream Man is going on, they're going to maybe start
Well,
expanding and bringing in other artists and all
it's
that.
it's even better than that
Okay.
because what I get to do, the final thing that pushed us over the edge for like, yes, this is the book I'm picking, is that 4 days ago, Image announced that issue 43 will be a full collection of one-page horror stories from
Oh,
Ooh.
Grant Morrison,
Oh
Patton
my God.
Oswalt, Zoe Thorogood, Jeff Johns, Jeff Lemire, Matt Fraction. It's like, oh my goodness. Like,
Mhm.
absolutely let that be your first issue of Ice Cream Man.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because that, and to me, like, Alex and I like going to conventions and things like that.
Mhm.
That, like, issue 43 of Ice Cream Man is an awesome book to try to like get all.
Oh,
Like,
imagine that. I mean,
Yeah,
that would be
that'd be a great
crazy.
project.
Like,
Yeah.
what a crew.
Yeah.
it's so
I,
much lighter than carrying around a box of 20 books to get signed for 20 creators. Get one book signed.
Not there's anything wrong with that because that's exactly what I do at
Of
shows.
course.
But no, I think also by listing that out and saying that, letting know that exists, it speaks to, I think, how horror as a genre, that all these creators
Mhm.
want to jump in and they have stories for it, also speaks directly, I think, to Ice Cream Man as a series, that it's how well regarded it is. I believe
Mhm.
it's an Eisner Award winning book. It has in the past. So I think just the
Mhm.
fact that they can bring in all these creators to come in and you got a cool story for one page,
Mhm.
and that they're willing to contribute and be a part of it. I
And
think,
that's
yeah,
also a big challenge to try and
super
tell a
hard.
scary story in one page. So I love
Telling any
that.
story in one page is tough, I think,
Yeah.
in general.
Hard to have a big reveal when it's on page the whole
Mhm.
time.
Exactly, which
Yeah,
Um,
then
exactly,
goes
exactly.
into the writing, the scripting, the storytelling of the artist. Like, you got
Mhm.
to get creative, you got to get good with it. And that's one of the special things about comics in general. that you can do that on one page. Whether it could just be one single page, it could be 3 panels, 9 panels, 16 panels, whatever it is. You just got one page to get your story across. And if you're good enough, and people you listed know for a fact they're good enough, they can do that. So that looks awesome. That looks nice. You said 43, Mike?
43, yeah.
That's definitely
I'm not
one I gotta
sure
pick
the
up.
release date, but okay, so final order cutoff for 42 is right now.
Okay, so it will be soon. It will be in the next
up.
kind of
I think it'll be
3 to 6 months, depending on how.
Yeah, oh, that's true. It might be at the end of his arc, but just like the coolest concept ever. And if W. Maxwell Prince was like, yeah, I'm kind of done like writing, 24-page scripts, and he just wants to organize a bunch of, be the curator of horror. Let it be the W. Maxwell Prince Ice Cream Man show, and bring in a different writer or artist,
that could totally work.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Well, and
yeah.
I think Image is always looking for the next tentpole kind of thing like that.
Yeah.
So I think they would love to see Ice Cream Man go beyond.
I mean,
definitely.
You would say this probably is. I mean, now that The Walking Dead is being, in terms of like a horror tentpole and Image, an anthology series that's as well regarded as Ice Cream Man is. I'm sure, they would love that, and if he. Expand it out and bring new creators in, new everything in, as long as it has the Ice Cream Man brand. I can't see them saying no to that. It's going to sell, So I think that'd be an awesome idea.
Yeah. So anyway, update your pull lists. Let your comic shop know that you will be starting at issue 43. But you just go back and get the trades. They're
all out there. They're all out there.
Yeah,
so.
Readily available.
All right. That's a great pick. So my next one, you mentioned Rosie, you mentioned both the book and the write already. It is Witches by Scott Snyder and Jock, and that's Witches, WYTCHES. Colors by Matt Hollingsworth and letters by Clem Robbins. Which one is that now, Mike? Which cat is that?
It's Fitz. He was yelling, and I was like, "You're not on the podcast, man."
Yeah, well, he is now.
You can be.
Yeah. So Witches is it's a real quick 6-issue miniseries.
Easy 1-volume collection.
Yeah, the premise is over the centuries, like hundreds of thousands of people, men, women, and children, have been drowned, hung, burned, tortured, whatever, in the name of witchcraft, but none of those people have actually been witches.
Of course.
And so that is your in terms of discovering the world their world of witches and witchcraft, and what that means to be a witch in the universe and the story that they've created. Jock's art is someone that, kind of his style, it's got kind of an aggressive style to it, which works well with horror, I think. And I think one thing they do really well in this book is it's not like super gory. It's not, there's a lot of tension that's built up, but in the non kind of horror aspects of the story, like the way it's colored, the way it's presented, it's our world. It looks like the normal world. We just talked about this with Revival and Mike Norton's art with Mark Englett's color, that it's very bright for horror. Revival happens in the daytime. Now, Witches, they use a lot of shadow, use a lot of darkness. So when it needs to get scary, when it needs to get creepy and eerie, they can do that. But the other aspects of the story, are not that. It's not all in shadow and darkness. So there's a great contrast there when you're reading it of, how to build that tension in the story. You see that there, it's going through. And yes, you mentioned Scott Snyder as another one of those guys who everyone knows from his DC work, ton of Batman work, ton of Justice League stuff, big stuff at DC. But almost all of his creator-owned stuff, much like James Tynion, as you mentioned, I think his literal student. I think Snyder actually taught him. And
Tynion was Snyder's assistant. That's how he ended up working at DC.
And he brought him in, and there's everything. And if you meet Scott Snyder and Tynion too, like the nicest, most chill guys, and yet they write some really messed up stuff. And probably goes back to Mike, what you're talking about of it's a way to process. It's a way to see the world and process the world and kind of get these thoughts out and put them out into the world somehow, and through their art and all of the creator-owned stuff is like that. And Snyder is no different. So yeah, this book is very, very cool. Currently in production, I believe, at Amazon Prime. There's an
Yeah,
adaptation,
I
I
think
think.
it's gonna. I think it. So it was pretty. It was picked up pretty quickly when it
Yeah,
first came out, and
yeah.
then I think what happened was it was a gonna be a movie, and I think currently it's in that like Amazon Prime kind of adult animation space, like Vox Machina or Invincible. I think
Yeah,
that was
something
the
like that.
last update.
Yeah. But
A horror
it's
animated cartoon would be pretty rad. That's not something we get in Western animation a lot,
Mhm.
so I would love to see that.
No, I think it'll be very, very cool. I know Snyder has posted some stuff about it in terms of what he's seen and all that. So he seems really happy about it, in terms of kind of where it's going and all that. But yeah, this is a book that, again, I think that's because it is Scott Snyder, and I've read a lot of his, almost all of his superhero stuff.
Hmm.
And it's led me to read a bunch of his independent, creator owned stuff, his
Yeah.
horror stuff. I think about like The Wake, which was a DC book, DC Vertigo book, maybe with Sean Gordon Murphy. It's kind of like The
Mm.
Thing, but underwater. We have Demons with Greg Capullo. Noctera has a horror aspect. That's with Tony Daniel.
Oh, of
I
course. Yeah.
I put that in with they kickstarted that early on before it went
Hmm.
full over to Image. American Vampire, which I haven't read all of, but he did that with
But yeah, and that was a big
Raphael
breakout for
Albuquerque.
him as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, that was a DC Vertigo as well. So, yeah, he's done, it's just the stuff he does. Any, he's obviously he's doing absolute Batman right now,
Hmm.
brand new chunky Batman over at DC.
Yeah.
So he still has a superhero aspect to him, but he's got books coming out at, whether it's, I think it's his imprint is called Best Jacket over at Dark Horse,
Hmm.
I think it is. Some like Comixology first stuff that comes out digitally and then in print. He has a book coming out over at Distillery again with Jock. It's
Hmm.
always going to have this horror element to it. And he's just one of
Yeah.
those guys now. Again, like Tynan, I guess you really should say Tynan, kind of like Snyder, if we're going in the right direction.
Hmm.
But these guys, they always have something going on there. But Witches, I think, just the premise and I love Jock's artwork, and I think it works so well with this horror
Yeah, he's
feel.
amazing.
Yeah, you get that, you get the vibe and kind of the unease. There's a
Hmm.
real creepiness to the
Hmm.
way he draws, and kind of the nature of the witches in their book. It comes out really, really cool. So Witches from Image, that's my second recommendation.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yep,
And a very easy pickup as well. Like it's just one volume.
exactly.
So you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
give it a try.
Yep. All right, Rosie. Number 3 for you.
Okay, my final recommendation. This really is just, I picked this one. I was gonna pick something by Junji Ito because he's like so amazing. Definitely the most seminal kind of living horror creator that we have right now. But I decided to go for this one just because I have all of Viz is republishing all of his old collections at the moment. Really beautiful, nice hardcover collections. Viz is doing just great work in the manga space. And for me, I just really like this one because it's kind of like, what if like a Bishosian, like sexy, cute, hunky kind of idol guy was actually this like horrifying visage of kind of the broken heart. And all of these stories are real, all of these collections are great that they do. There's Shiva, there's a bunch of other ones. They also are doing like reprints of Uzumaki and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I love this. It showcases his gorgeous black and white line work really well. And it's basically there's multiple stories, but most of them are connected by this kind of scary, beautiful figure. And it's rare that Junji Ito does a scary, beautiful guy figure. So this is kind of a different trope for him.
So
He's very usually into like a Tomi or like a girl who haunts
have you
somebody.
said the title yet? I don't think you have said the
Oh,
title yet.
sorry, it's called Love Sickness.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Yes, Love Sickness by
So
Junji Ito. Yeah.
it's yeah, and it's really interesting. It's a collection of short stories, so you don't have to commit too much time. You can just read one, two, 8-page stories as you go, 8, 9 pages. And it all starts with rumor, a kind of folkloric tradition that if you go to a train crossing on a foggy night, you can see or someone will be there to tell you your future and who you'll fall in love with. But then it turns out that when women go there, they always see this beautiful guy, and there's kind of these twisty, turny, and lots of scary Junji Ito, beautifully brought together kind of horrible events that occur. He is one of the few comics creators where I can actually like get creeped out while reading the books. Like a lot of times it's just like I'm just enjoying the story, you know. But he really, these kind of, if I'm reading this like in an evening comes along and the sun goes down, I can really find myself getting like legitimately freaked out. But honestly, any book by Junji Ito is incredible. Tomi is still probably my favorite. There is a great collection. This was actually, I think, the first Junji Ito Eisner win when Viz won for Best US Edition of International Material Asia. Very catchy award title there. But yeah, it's so good. It, just like many Junji Ito stuffs, there's like a hilarious like 2001 like live action adaptation that's super bootleg but really enjoyable to watch. And I just do think if you love comics and you've never read manga, which I totally understand because it can be very overwhelming, I think Junji Ito is like a must read, even if you're not a horror fan, because it's just so beautifully drawn. And even if you're scared, you can always get a Junji Ito. He has books about his cats and kind of his love of cats and being a cat owner. So those are like way more fun, even though he does sometimes draw the cats in scary, kind of a scary style that he's so known for. But yeah, I'm a big fan of this one, and really any of his works. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy recently with the Uzumaki adaptation on Adult Swim, which took 5 years to make. But I would say if you have access to it, if you want to go on Hulu or I believe Netflix, you can watch the first episode, which is legitimately one of the best animated things you've ever seen, and then just don't watch the rest of it because distinct fall off in quality. But another great way to get to know Junge, just stop after episode 1. It's a kind of an enclosed tale in its own way, and you get to kind of see that beautiful art style brought to life, which we rarely get to see. A style of animation actually directly adapted to the screen rather than kind of changed or updated. So it's really appealing. But yeah, big Junji Ito fan over here.
That's great because I've actually been looking for the right book to start with because in my part of the city, I live across the street from a manga shop, really the dedicated manga shop in town, which, you know, it opened and I was like, I got to support my community. So I went in there. I was like, what should I read? I read Western comics and everywhere. And long story short, I found my way into a couple different series there, and this was a little over 2 years ago, and I can track that because I have a 2-year-old daughter now whose name is Anya. Wow. So obviously Spy Family was like
I was gonna say was that that I love that.
So
that is so cute.
My wife and I couldn't agree on a name, and we were just laying in bed chuckling, like passing these volumes back and forth.
Yeah.
And it was like, I don't want to like name it after this book we just discovered, but also like we both like the name and it works.
And also Anya is like one of the cutest characters ever.
Oh my gosh,
this is not a horror recommendation, but if you are listening to this and you do want to try and get into manga, one of the books that I think is one of the best books of the last like 10 years in any comics form is a Witch Hat Atelier by Kamome Shirahama. And if you are a big Western comics fan, very Art Adams art style. She's very intricate. She's very fantastical, but it also has this incredibly unique setup about how the magic system works within this world. And it's about a little girl who wants to become a witch in a world where magic is real. And she finds herself kind of working for an adult witch as an assistant and learning about it. But I think that's just, I give that book to everyone who says they don't know what manga to read.
Yeah,
so definitely that one.
We did a live like community meetup night episode at the manga shop, and that was one of the books that someone came on and recommended. So it's been on my list.
Great. It's truly fantastic. And yeah, honestly, I would say like any of the Viz is doing a collection, I believe it's just called Junji Ito Story Collection. Really any of them. Like Love Sickness is one I really like because I think it's I like things that play around with other tropes and kind of this Bishoujen, like hunky, like but slender, like beautiful guy who you're going to fall in love with being evil, I think is interesting. But like Shiver is great. Even the Junji Ito, he did an adaptation of Frankenstein that's really fantastic that they published as one of those collections. So if you see the books in that and you just kind of flick through
Yeah.
and see which stories seem to speak to you. I think those are a great way to get in to his
Yeah,
world.
he's got his own display at the
I was going
manga
to say
shop.
they
Of
have a section.
course.
They have
Yeah.
a section in the shop for that, don't they? For
and
him.
yeah, and it's the new editions, you know, that are coming out. And I always say which one of these should I read, and they're like all of them.
Yeah.
Like
It
that's
really
super
is like
helpful.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
yeah.
I'll be
But
like,
you-
what's your favorite one?
Right. Well, that's what. Yeah. So I typically say that, and they're like, it's like a three-way tie. I'm like, I can't tell if you're just trying to move books or if you really love this guy's work.
They
But you are
probably
the.
just really love Junji Ito.
I think that's it. Yeah. But you were the
but-
third guest
yeah,
on this podcast to talk about Junji Ito.
Oh.
The first was Hillary Jenkins, who ended up doing Hairball with Matt
Oh,
Kent,
cool.
and which very clearly cat horror drawing on
Yes,
that.
yes.
And then earlier this year, we still have not seen what they're going to do with it, but Sarah Gailey was
Mhm.
saying that they are very into Junji Ito right now, and I was like,
Oh man, I love
yes.
Sarah Gailey so much.
I know.
They're
my
fantastic.
gosh.
We talked about Eat the Rich and Know Your Station, and then
Mhm.
again, probably the only other horror books we've done, horror adjacent books besides
Yeah.
Revival, which we just finished, and we mentioned the Apocalyptic trilogy from Tynan and Donovan. Yeah,
Mhm.
Eat the Rich and I mean definitely Eat the Rich, and also Know Your Station as well. I think
Oh
both
yeah,
have
yeah.
both have horror elements that Sarah wrote, and that's right. They did mention Junji Ito. Now that you mentioned that. But
He
yeah,
is
that's
really truly, I think, like he has become like a watershed creator
Yeah.
in the kind of love of the more accessible love of like manga in America. And it's not just to do with like obviously sales wise, he is not up there with like a Demon Slayer or something like that. But I think that all different cartoonists who make the books we love, he is a cartoonist they really respect. And for people like us, I think that is something that will always draw us to an artist is like, who's our artist? Who's our favorite artist's favorite artist? And for a lot of people, it really is
yeah.
Junji Ito. And also as well, like, I don't know if you ever go on Viz Media's Instagram, but he is also like a really, really funny, sweet 60-year-old guy. And when you kind of read these, it's like you're saying about Jeff Lemire, right? Jeff is such a nice guy as well. Like, and I like
Canadian.
it.
Yeah.
And I also like him because he's always like really real about working for the big two. So you'll interview him when he's just going back into creator owned, and he'll just be dragging the big two, and he's like, and then he'll go back and he's like,
You'll go back
I'm ready to
6
be
months
back,
later, yeah,
guys.
he'll
I'm
do it
ready
again.
to be back. But like Junji Ito is somebody who I think he really channels the fears and the existential horror and the anxiety of being a human through these books. But when you speak to him or when you see him in these videos, you know, he is just like a sweet uncle who is just, and I think that juxtaposition is also very appealing to people to say, oh, actually,
Sure.
normal people love making horror. Normal,
Yeah.
there's not something wrong or outsider about this. It's actually just a way of people, like you said earlier, Mike, like it's cathartic, you know.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, Mike, last pick for you. What do you got?
All right. Well, I also wanted to go in the manga direction, and I've got a few so. I have a reputation at the manga shop. I have 3 cats, but I'm also like very easily sold by cat things, which is very dangerous in a manga shop. So if you want something funny and terrifying, this is not my official recommendation, but Night of the Living Cat is a Night of the Living Dead spoof where instead of turning into a zombie, you turn into a cat, and everyone knows like you have to stay away from the cats. But as soon as they see one up close, they're like, "Oh, cute!" And like, this is the downfall of all society.
Honestly, very relatable.
Yeah. So the one I'm going with is a book I recently discovered called The Horizon, which I picked it up. The cover art's beautiful. You get a few color pages at the beginning, and then it is all this like crudely sketched black and white, very sparse on words. This is one of those books where you read at whatever pace you want. You can really sit in it and savor it, or you can knock out 300-400 less than an hour, no problem. I mean, if you're just reading to like get through it. But the first volume here, I think there are 4 total. It's called The Strange Man, and it is these 2 children, post-apocalyptic, just walking. We don't really even know toward where, but occasionally they will pass just mountains of corpses, occasionally walking through conflict, But as they're walking through this field, this very strange, scary looking man starts following them and gets closer and closer and closer. And he wants to drink their water, but he doesn't speak. So he drinks all of their water, and then he starts staying with them, but he's afraid of fire. So when they start a campfire at night, he'll stay like 10 feet away, but they're like, this is probably
Very
like,
alarming.
right.
Yeah.
They're
Sounds
like
very
11-year-olds
unsettling.
sleeping in shifts because they don't know when
Yeah.
this guy's going to snap. And that's the whole book. So it's just letting that tension build slowly, panel by panel. You can read it for free online as a webtoon. It's on, is it webtoons.com?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I should technically say I believe this is manhwa because the creator is just listed on the book as JH. There's literally
Yeah, I
no
think it's a
other
Korean. I think
attribute.
it is
Yeah, yeah.
originally a
Yes.
Korean.
Jung
And
Ji
yeah,
Hoon is his name.
yeah,
So
webtoon
JH.
is
Yeah.
But it also reads left to right in print, which is
Yeah.
another giveaway from manhwa.
Interesting.
And it has a couple color pages at the beginning, which
I
every
love
once
a
in a while
good.
you'll get a manga that will do
That's
that.
nice. Yeah, Viz has been doing that with the Junji stuff and the Riniko Takahashi stuff, and I really like that.
But yeah, so I like anything else I say about it, I think we'll start to like spoil and get into it. But otherwise, read it for free online. But it's just a gorgeous
It
edition
looks
of
like
a
a
book.
really nice edition. Who publishes that?
This is IZ, which I'm not
IZE Press,
familiar with.
interesting.
IZEpress.com. It's $20, but if you find like a brick and mortar shop,
Oh,
especially one
it
selling manga.
it is an imprint of Yen Press. So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
they're a
Wow.
really big they're a great publisher and they've been putting out a lot of really good stuff. Though I will say hilariously, don't just like if you're like me and sometimes you like a romance manga, don't just like randomly buy any romance manga from Yen Press because I have been horrified by some of the things that I have
Yeah.
learned
You
about the
you never
I
know.
fell into the Omegaverse. It was terrible. I was not ready for it. So I would say be careful. But yeah, they are really great publisher doing a lot of really cool stuff.
Okay.
You never know. You never know.
Speaking of Yen Press, that was my other honorable mention for horror manga is a book that is almost finished coming out called Glitch, which is a single
Ooh.
creator, Shima Shinya, who I read a book that they created called Lost Lead London, which is just like a noir mystery book set in London. And it's a 3-volume manga. It was incredible. I loved it. They write and draw and illustrate everything. And now there's a book called Glitch, which is a little more of a straight horror play. These ghostly figures start appearing in this town. People kind of move to a new town, don't remember outside. I mean, it's almost like a Hayao Miyazaki premise of like, there's this weird little town that this new family moves into. They start to discover weird stuff going on. But it's a little creepier than anything Hayao Miyazaki would do. But yeah, I follow this creator on Instagram and use the built-in meta translation for all posts. And I'm trying to figure out authentic release dates for things because there's also another series they just released in Japan that I have no idea if and when it's coming to America. But it's just like a fun level of suspense to know like this person, and apparently also does some Star Wars manga.
Oh, cool. I've really enjoyed those.
Did they do what did they be part of the Star Wars Visions?
I want
So
to say Old Republic, maybe.
okay,
Oh yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Let me see.
There's been some
the High Republic.
High Republic. Yeah,
Republic,
they've
Edge of
done some stuff.
Balance.
They've done some so off of the Star Wars Visions kind of miniseries that they did on Disney Plus. They brought some of those into print and went to some Japanese artists to either expand on their stories from that or do variant covers or things like that. Just do things that are directly manga inspired.
Yeah.
Or for their actual print comics. So yeah, I'm not surprised by that. If they've someone who's done work. Yeah.
It's called High Republic. Edge of Balance is the first one. Anyway, I feel like Shima Shinya is one of those names that will catch on eventually and just blow up because their work it's so pretty, it's so accessible, it reads well, the art is great, and really coming up with original premises and doing like a slice of life mystery in London is not something you're going to find in a manga shop very often.
No,
It's
definitely
just like
not.
not a setting or a premise that you would really think. There's
Mm-hmm.
nothing supernatural about that book. Glitch, obviously, you get into the supernatural with shadow beings walking around, possibly flitting between multiversal dimensions or something.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know yet. I can't even spoil it if I wanted to. So anyway, Alex, what do you have?
All right. Well, Rosie, you were talking about, how maybe books to read for someone who's not really a manga reader. And I raised my hand
Mm-hmm.
on that. Something that Mike and I have talked about. I am not a manga reader for a number of slightly complicated and maybe not so complicated, like cultural reasons or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
But as close as I get to manga is a book like I'm going to recommend here, which is The Night Eaters
Oh, I love that book.
by
What a pick.
Marjorie Liu and Sana Takada. It's from Art Abrams Comics Art. They are the
Ooh,
team behind Monstrous, and
I love that
Monstrous
book.
is an incredible book. Monstrous, real quick, does have horror elements. It has, I think the glib byline I've seen for that was like steampunk meets kaiju, which
Yeah,
like really
Monstrous
makes sense.
definitely has horror elements. I
Yeah,
would say also like it's basically like a kind of like what if like a Rumiko Takahashi story like Inuyasha was like a steampunk
yeah,
period drama with giant monsters.
yeah.
Like it's very complex and
Yeah,
great.
Monstrous. Yeah, it's this alt universe kind of early 20th century East Asia, and it blends in all of these different aspects of
Hmm.
Asian folklore and myth and all that. So there are monsters and things like that. But it is an incredibly gorgeous looking book, and so off of that, Liu and Takada they went the Brubaker Phillips route, where they started releasing a new series that's an original graphic novels, and that's what the Night
Hmm.
Eaters is. That the plan is it's going to be three. It's a trilogy of books. The first two are out right now.
Yeah.
Volume one is called She Eats the Night, and volume two is Her Little Reapers. And the
Hmm.
basic premise is it's set in our world, our day, current day. It centers around two Chinese American twins, Millie and Billy. They're trying to run a restaurant. They're like a fast
Mm.
casual restaurant, Asian inspired. And on one side, they've got their kind of happy-go-lucky, very positive dad, and their wildly disapproving mother, kind of overbearing. And through a number of factors, they get brought into cleaning up this house. It's across the street from where they grew up. It's overgrown, and there was a terrible murder that was committed there. Their mother guy bought the house and started cleaning it up. And in this process, they get pulled into this larger supernatural world of
Hmm.
like demons and spirits and a lot of kind of really shady and weird things, and that leads them to uncover dark secrets about their own family and their own origin
Hmm.
and where they come from and their
Hmm.
ties to all of it. And it one thing I love and what I love about Monstrous that Lou and Takada have done in The Night Eater, they have this blend of really character focused stories set in these larger supernatural worlds. So they have these
Hmm.
higher concept fantasy and supernatural elements, but they put all this work into the characters as well. So it's not just the showcase of monsters in terms of monstrous, not like kaijus and beings and things like
Hmm.
that. For the Night Eaters, it's not just these demons and spirits and kind of gory aspects to it. They put a lot of work into the characters, until you're invested in them. You know who they are and what their journey is.
Hmm.
And so the Night Eaters just has that. And I'm the third volume hasn't been solicited yet. I don't see it out there. Hopeful it's coming maybe sometime in
Yeah, I'm sure.
2025.
Honestly,
I,
Sana Takada is like one of the best artists out there working at the moment. So like,
what she's able to do in terms of like backgrounds and
hmm,
like big splash pages and the detail that goes into it is
yeah.
just incredible. It's something that it's one of the reasons I picked up Monstrous. You flip through it, you're like, this
Hmm.
is incredible. I
You
gotta,
never seen anything
yeah,
like it. I was
I
working at the shop when it came out, and I
it's like
still,
I have to read this because I have to know
yeah.
what's going on with this story. And so
Hmm.
yeah, when they say they're announcing they're doing this other book here, this new series, yeah, I had to jump in on it. And so yeah, the Night Eaters,
So good.
yeah, so the first two volumes are out now. You can go pick them up and go read them, and then join me and everyone else just impatiently waiting for volume three for this conclusion whenever it comes. I think they've
Hmm.
been coming. I want to say it's been one a year. I want to say it was maybe the first one was 2022, maybe, and
Hmm.
then Little Reapers may have been, year and a year and a half ish. So I'm hopeful 2025, whatever the unnamed volume 3 comes out. Because they're doing this and they're also still putting out Monstrous. So like Monstrous went on break for a little while as they worked on the Night Eaters, and now Monstrous is back on its monthly-ish schedule as it's coming out with a little bit breaks here and there. So like I don't know how they're juggling it. I don't know what state the stories are in and what they're working on, but they got both these things going on now, and I'm hopeful we get that third volume sometime soon, because I was gripped in immediately in there. Just with the story and with the world, and again with the characters, which I think something that the two of them do so well in their storytelling.
Yeah, I just want to as well, like I feel like, we've covered such a wide breadth of stuff here, but I just want to shout out, there was 2 other comics that I was thinking about, and I just I think that especially if you are a Night Eater style fan, there was a comic called Darlin and Her Other Names by Olivia Stevens, which I wrote quite extensively about when it came out in 2023. It's like a Western werewolf horror romance comic, and you can just read it on Gumroad. Olivia self-published it, but it's like so good. It ended up winning the Ignatz Award for Outstanding Artist, ended up being on a bunch of Best Comics of the Year lists, including I put it on my Polygon list for that year. That was amazing. This is like the next level of indie where it's self-publishing. Olivia Stevens is really, really great. I love the work that they put out, and there's also like a Spotify playlist you can listen to while you read the comic, which I love. And also there is a comic that I think is currently now being published by Silver Sprocket by Emily Carroll or E.M. Carroll called When I Arrived at the Castle. That's like a sapphic lesbian vampire kind of hammer horror book. And both of those are like really, if you want to see what like indie cartoonists who are even working outside of the direct market space are doing, those are like 2 fantastic, like true indie comics that I just really love.
That's awesome. Mike, do you have honorable mentions? Anything last
I do.
Year?
Yeah, I was gonna mention, because it was in the running for Doug Wagner Vinyl, and Plastic I think is the next one. But Vinyl is one of those that you're reading horror and it's gut-wrenching in another way. For known anyone with Alzheimer's or dementia, it like really good, like Jordan Peele horror. You think
thought-provoking,
right? Yeah, you think you're dealing with one thing, and then he sucker punches something else, and that was reminding me of the other thing that I want to say about horror is that someone asked Jordan Peele like what it was like to switch from comedy to horror like so abruptly. They thought this was a surprising. He said actually it's the exact same, right? It's about subverting expectations. It's just going the other direction with it. Like whenever you think you have someone's expectation set, you step left, it's comedy, you step right, it's horror. And he's like, it's really the same writing process, which I found fascinating, and I can't unthink it now that I've heard him say that. But that was one that I just got because the covers look cool. I was reading it, and then and I had a grandfather who had Alzheimer's for 15 years, and so I kind of got slapped by that one. It was a really weird experience. I was like roasting coffee out on my porch, having a cigar, reading comics, and Mormons came up to my door to like evangelize me or something. I was like,
they were
sorry.
proselytizing, and I was like,
sorry. I'm reading a really gory, tragically sad book while smoking a cigar and drinking whiskey in front of Mormons. I'm like, just please go to the next house. No offense, but like it's not the time. It's not the. So anyway, that was a cool book, and I've been meaning to read Plastic, but I am worried that they're gonna trick.
Yeah, probably a safe bet on that. One book that I thought of immediately when we talked about horror was Lock and Key, Joe Hill and Gabriel Rodriguez.
Wow, well pick.
Which is in
that book,
which is so good. And the reason I thought of it first was because I came to that book a little late. I was reading it in trade, and then years after, which is years prior to where we are now, I started going back and I was like, this is the book I got to collect in single issue because I have to have that. I had that impulse. So I went back and I started doing that. And I was up in a shop, not here in Cincinnati. It was a shop up in Dayton. And I was flipping through, they're pretty much broken down by like publishers. So I went to the IDW section and I'm flipping through and there's no lock and key. And I'm like, that's like not nothing there. I'm like, I can't believe this. And I talked to the owner. I was like, I'm looking for that is just a lock and key. And he's like, oh yeah, no, they're in the horror section. And I was like, really? And in that moment, I was like, oh yeah, that is a horror book, isn't it? Like
there's a lot of horrifying stuff that happens in that book.
It had, prior to that moment, if you would ask me what this book was, what genre it was, I would not have thought of horror. Which maybe comes to me having, especially at that point, not read a lot of horror comics. But as soon as he said it, I was like, oh yeah, obviously. You think about all the things that happen, the things that are shown on the page, and the premise. You're like, oh, this is very much is a horror book. But up until that moment, I wouldn't have thought about it. So I walked back to the horror section, and sure enough, there was a bunch of back issues I could fill in there. But yeah, I here I was in a shop, and it would have never dawned on me that this book was a horror book. But yeah, it totally is. And so yeah, it's an incredible book. Definitely one you should definitely go out and read. Two more real quick. One is a book called Redlands by Jordi Belair and Vanessa Del Rey. We mentioned Jordi's name. She's one of the best colorists in the business. This is the book that she wrote and colored. I heard her talk about it. She, wrote the scripts up, sends them off to Vanessa Del Rey, the artist, incredible artist. Then the books, then the pages came back to Jordi, as she would then color them. Then they went sent back off to the letters. But it's a book about a small town in Florida that's run by witches. And someone in town decides they no longer want the witches in charge. And then hilarity ensues. And by hilarity, I mean a lot of really, really terrible things. But it is a dark and creepy, eerie book, again, set in Florida. So you have that dark, dank swamp environment there, which is such a ripe location for so much horror. So that's a very, very, very cool book. I want to say it's 10 or 12 issues, something like that, but I think it's 2 trades worth of material, called Redlands. Very, very cool. Last one I want to talk about, which Mike and I talked a little bit about because we got to interview Pornsack Picture Show, which is Infidel.
Oh, how cool.
Infidel,
yeah.
that was his first published comic work, art by Aaron Campbell. It focuses on a Muslim American woman living in this building, which is kind of a multicultural inhabitants. And the building is haunted by these beings that feed and power themselves on xenophobia. So it is a look at race and our understanding of race and race relations in America through the idea of horror and these monsters that feed on that racism and bigotry. So again, the idea that horror can be an avenue, that side door into so many other conversations, so many different genres, and Infidel is one of those books. So that's a book out there.
Probably throughout his Dead Boy Detectives too, right?
Probably, yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, his run, I love that. Great.
Brought in a bunch of Southeast Asian, which is obviously Pornsack's his heritage there. Brought in a bunch of folklore and myth about death and the afterlife and all that from Southeast Asia. So yeah, Dead Boy Detectives, his run on that, very, very cool. So
oh yeah, I would also recommend, it has been cancelled sadly, but the Dead Boy Detectives adaptation that they did on Netflix was absolutely fantastic. Just totally it's a brilliant, gorgeous, queer found family, spooky season watch. It's way more diverse than the original comics. It's way more updated in a perfect way. I thought it was one of the best shows of the year, and
it is so technically good. Part of their
Sandman universe. Yeah, it is directly connected if you are a completionist.
So, it is a spin-off from I mean, Dead Boy Detectives is a spin-off from Sandman in the comics, and Netflix. Yeah, even though they canceled it, you're right. It is from their Sandman adaptation. Sandman season 2 is coming at some point on Netflix, so the universe still exists, but you're right, Dead Boy Detectives was just
hopefully they'll show
one season
up.
wonder.
Fingers crossed.
That would be great if since their show is done, bring them back into the Sandman universe. So yeah, that'd be very, very cool. So yeah, Infidel by Pornsack Picture Show. Mike and I, we got to talk to him because we talked about The Good Asian, which is such an incredible book.
Yeah, such a fan. Me and Jason are big fans. It is noir though, so we're going back.
It is noir, which is a genre I love. Again, I love Rubric and Phillips, but Infidel is a cool book. So
I have one more.
Sure.
Almost missed the list.
Okay,
but there's another one we talked to him this year was Kyle Starks.
Yeah.
I just want to remind people that I Hate This Place was not meant to be a comedy, even though he won the Eisner.
He won
for
the
best
Eisner
comedy.
for that. Yeah.
Oh, so that's classic.
But Pine and Merrimack, if you didn't read that, gorgeous book from Fran Galan.
Galan, I think it's pronounced because the accent's on
who
the
I
second
had
A.
never heard of before. Pine and Merrimack, like absolutely stole the show with a book, and it's like there are funny quips, but it is not what you think of with Kyle Starks. He's really going for like a real thriller horror aspect, and it ends after 5 or 6 issue. I think 5.
I think it's 5. Yeah.
With I think he meant it to be a series wrap, but it's like the end of a Twilight Zone episode, and it's like, please write more. I know you're writing 5 titles a year right now, but please come back to this.
Yeah, that's a beautiful book.
So yeah, highly recommend that. And that one, that's another one. I don't even think it's out in trade yet. Maybe
it has to be by now. It has to be by now.
But I think you could still find all those things. Maybe
probably so
in your dollar bins.
But yeah, that's a great book. Kyle was great too. And yeah, the humor category for the Eisners is always an iffy one because the books there are not always the ones that are actually funny.
The categorization of the Eisners, especially now they've added the books for younger readers category where they kind of just put any diverse book, even if it's not necessarily a YA book. There's categorization in award shows it's a hilarious thing.
Yeah, you're right. Once they get into trying to specify genre and type, the Eisners get a little wonky there. But
also, guys, what's a graphic album? Nobody knows. What's a graphic album? Nobody knows. Is it different from a graphic novel? Never. I'll never know. But you know what? The Eisners, we love you, the Eisners. We appreciate the work that you're doing.
They're great, absolutely. Even if they're not always indicative of someone who wins the award is not always maybe what the book actually is.
And since we don't know what a graphic album is, why not give it to Rosie this year?
Hey, exactly. Yeah. Put Monster Island Summer Camp best graphic album. I feel like Oliver Ono's art. But also, if anyone is listening to this and they do, Oliver Ono, I think he should get best new artist this year. I think he is so deserving of it. I'm like, let's get him in there. Let's get him that Russ Manning New Artist Award. Let's make
best
sure
new talent award.
Best new talent award. Let's see if we can get him up there for best artist. I love Monster Island Summer Camp. I would obviously be honored to be even in like the conversation about being nominated. But if Oliver gets nominated, I think that is the most important part because he just absolutely smashed it. And I think the book is special, and we've been very lucky with the incredible response that we've had to it. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, Godzilla Monster Island Summer Camp is super, super fun. Even if you're not like a big Godzilla person, it is a great. It's a YA book, right, Rosie?
Yeah,
is that how you classify it? Yeah. I mean,
so like, it was. We were very lucky. It's basically it was sold as a middle grade book, which is 8 to 11 years old. But I do feel like the nature of publishing original graphic novel at a more traditional publisher like IDW, we got a lot of freedom. So I definitely would say it can be read by older kids. There's not necessarily the same conflicts you would or emotional kind of struggles that often denote a YA, but we have definitely gotten feedback from older teenagers who really enjoyed it too. And if you are just somebody who loves,
I loved it.
Yeah, you loved it. Yeah. And also, like, if you're somebody who just loves beautiful art, I think Oliver does such a great job of making the world. And Nick, my husband, who Alex you met when we were at the signing in Ohio, he came in clutch and helped us out with the colors. So I think it's a really unique looking book, and I feel very lucky that people were vibing on it. You know, fingers crossed we'll get to do more stuff. And me and Oliver, we have more cool things in the works.
That is great.
Outside of the Godzilla space as well, which is really fun.
That is awesome. Yeah, that's Godzilla Monster Island Summer Camp. Go find it. Rosie's the writer, Oliver Ono, incredible artist. So listen, I think that's all we have. Rosie, thank you so much.
It was a joy. Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me on and letting me just
X-Ray Vision. We can listen to you on there, and
everyone can listen.
You write all over the internet.
I write all over the internet. You can. I have the easiest thing to do is I have a page. Authory.com/Rosie Knight. That is an incredible service where they basically scrape the internet and make sure that all your newest articles, podcasts, things that you write are out there. It is a tough time in digital media right now. So if you need a writer, let me know, because I'm full-time freelance, always looking. But you can find me at places like IGN, Nerdist, Esquire, The Hollywood Reporter. Honestly, I've just been very lucky to work with a bunch of incredible people. X-Ray Vision is also expanding. We have 3 episodes a week now. So we will have the Tuesday and Thursday episodes with me and Jason. And we will also have a Wednesday episode, which will be an extra. Sometimes we'll be on it. Sometimes it will be some of our incredible producers. Like at the moment, we have Abu and Aaron doing an Arcane Season 1 look back, which is really great. And yeah, I also have a ton of different comics coming out. Mine and Oliver's next comic is going to be a legendary Godzilla comic. It's a 20-page story in a graphic novel they have coming out, and it's about the fan favorite character, Doug, Titanus Doug, who's just another little guy. So really, we're promoting the little guy experience. So yeah, and you can find me on Instagram and Letterboxd at Rosie Marks, MARX.
We'll have all that stuff in the show notes here, so where you can find Rosie and all of her stuff. So listen, that was so much fun. Rosie, thank you so much,
guys. I hope you have a great evening.
Happy Halloween to anyone listening.
Happy Halloween.
Keep it going for a few more weeks. Pick up all these books and
keep the spooky season going, baby.
a long